Hello from the Authors Guild Foundation. Thanks for joining us today to discuss Ramona Emerson's new novel, Exposure. This is part of our series From Manuscript to Marketplace. She's joined by Soho Press editor Nick Whitney, and our moderator once again is Lily Philpott. With support from the National Endowment for the Arts and our donors, the Authors Guild Foundation is pleased to offer educational programs like this, free and open to the public. If you join our free newsletter list, you can get invites to all public programs we do like this. And if you're interested in Authors Guild membership, visit authorsguild.org to learn about our legal services and advocacy work and other membership benefits. So From Manuscript to Marketplace features case studies on the path to publication of a recent successful book. The author and publishing team walk us through a little oral history of the book's journey from acquisition through editorial to marketing and launch day. So we get to see behind the scenes details about what's happening publishing a book right now in today's market. We like to feature a variety of genres and sizes of publishers in this series, so you can find past recorded events under the resources section of our website. But today we're really happy to be talking about a thriller, a sophomore novel, a book in a series or with repeating characters. It's always helpful to hear different experiences that authors and their books are having in publishing today. And with that, I'll briefly introduce Ramona Emerson, a Diné writer and filmmaker originally from Tohatchee, New Mexico. She was a crime scene, a police department photographer in Albuquerque for 16 years, and she's now an Emmy nominee, producer, and storyteller in many ways. Happy to have Ramona with us here today, and Nick Whitney, associate editor at Soho Press, Soho Crime. He previously worked at the Feminist Press at the City University of New York. And our moderator, Lily Philpott. I'll go ahead and hand it over to you. Thanks for coming back and leading this conversation, Lily.
Of course. Thank you so much, Johnny. And thanks to the Authors Guild. Thank you all for joining us, no matter what time zone you're in, whether this is your morning coffee break, evening coffee, evening meal, or lunch. We're so excited to speak with Ramona and Nick. As Johnny mentioned, we're going to talk mostly about the path to publication, but I wanted to do a quick show and tell of the covers of Ramona's two novels so that you know what they look like when you go into your local independent bookstore or on bookshop.org. Please do make sure to order a copy. These books are incredible, and we're going to talk specifically about Exposure, which is the sequel to Shudder. Ramona, I just want to sort of kick it right off with you. If there are audience members who are not familiar with your work, would you give a brief rundown of the concept and journey of Shudder and Exposure, what that arc looks like? Maybe most importantly, did you have a sequel in mind when you sold the first book to Soho Crime?
Oh, well, thanks, Lily. Well, actually, no. Um, when I published Shudder, it was a miracle. I will say I really had toiled on it for about 8 years in some iteration or another. And it was a long process I wrote that book during my MFA program at IAIA, and had actually, right after I graduated, got an agent and started working on the book right away. And also Juliet called me.
Mm-hmm.
And right after graduation, and she saw one of the very first drafts of the book. And it went through a very long process to get to where it is now. So thank you, Juliet, for that. I'll tell you more about that later if you'd like to know. But the actual arc of Shudder really started with short stories I had written in a writing workshop with Joan Tewksbury in northern New Mexico. And I had just been doing, like writing prompts, and I had been kind of rusty. I had only been doing screenplays and maybe poetry. I had a few poetry classes in college, and it had been years since I had actually written anything beyond a treatment or a log line or a funding application for my documentary work. So that was mostly what my writing was concentrated on. So the early drafts of Shudder were written off of just short stories, and I kind of put them together thinking maybe it would be a short story collection. But very early on in the program, I began to start fleshing it out in very chronological order, kind of talking about a woman who worked in forensics. Um, and then the ghosts came later. The ghost as a theme or as a constant threat in the book kind of came after I knew I wanted to write about a woman who was doing forensics, because I knew as a Diné woman that was a very taboo job to have, and I had that job for 16 years, and I wanted to write about that process. So when I was trying to, I guess, just spice it up a little bit, and I didn't feel like it was spicy enough, and I tried to figure out, like, what's the worst thing that could happen to a Diné woman beyond working in forensics. And I thought, well, if they could speak to dead people, that would probably be like the worst thing ever to happen to a Diné person, because they would be really ostracized in their community, and they'd have to deal with death, which is a very real and intense taboo in our culture. And that's where it started. And it just started to go on from there. And a lot of the book, Rita's journey, kind of goes back and forth in the book between her childhood and her current day, investigations, working on crime scenes. So bringing the ghost in really tied the whole story together for me. And all of the things that are in Shutter either came from what I learned at APS CSI classes for 16 weeks, or came from my job working in forensics in Albuquerque for 16 years. And my job working forensics was pretty sterile compared to working in the police department. So that's why I went to school at APD to learn vernacular, to learn about that. So I learned everything from ballistics to fingerprinting to investigating blood spatter to really everything about investigating a crime scene, and processing it from every angle. And I needed to know that, and I wanted to know it. So in the process of that, we came into the story of Rita and how the ghosts and her own culture and her own childhood affect every decision she makes. And I think that's really what Shutter is about. So as we moved into exposure, I didn't have that crutch of her childhood to lean on anymore. I had told that story, and I needed to move on with Rita's present day. But I also needed to think about Rita at the last iteration of Shutter and how she was feeling, and her need for healing, her need for rejuvenation, her need for discovering her own culture and relying on people, which I think is something that's a real problem for her. Um, so I knew there had to be this journey of self-discovery for her, but I also knew that I needed to continue to tie Rita into a crime, into an alternate storyline. And I started really thinking about a serial killer, and how a serial killer would work in this story. And at the same time I'm doing this, I'm also making a documentary about border town violence. And so I had a lot of things in my head about what I had been studying and what I had been filming as I'm making this film. And I brought a lot of those elements into exposure, because there is a real epidemic of Native deaths, Navajo deaths in Gallup. And people often dismiss what could be murders or other nefarious activities for just death from exposure. And because they're poor and they're indigent and they're Navajo, they aren't investigated, and they're just kind of chalked up to exposure deaths. And so during this time that I set Shutter in, there was like one of the coldest winters ever in Gallup, and there were a significant amount of murders and a significant amount of exposure deaths that year. And so all of that tied in to me creating the serial killer. And I did a significant amount of serial killer research over while I was on tour actually for Shutter. I was already doing prep for exposure and doing some pretty deep investigation into serial killers' lives and biographies, documentaries, everything I could get my hands on, to really get an insight into who these people are and how I could create a complex character for the second book.
Thank you so much. I think that speaks so well to what I love about your work, how deeply and personally researched it is, how concerned it is with the actual and vital communities in New Mexico and elsewhere in the Southwest. And the ghosts, like there is so much there, and I love it so dearly. I do want to ask Nick quickly, we'll sort of pull back a little bit to before Shutter even made its way out into the world. I want to ask you to just give us a little bit of a rundown of Soho Press, which has a couple of imprints. Soho Crime is the publisher of Shutter and Exposure. Could you just explain a little bit about how those kind of work together, how it's chosen that a book ends up with Soho Crime versus Soho Press? Yeah, and everything that entails.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks everyone for coming today, and thanks Lily and the Authors Guild and Ramona. It's an honor to be here. Yeah, so I work in the editorial department at Soho Press, and as Lily was saying, we have 4 distinct imprints under the broader house of Soho Press, which is an independent publishing house based in New York, founded in 1986. So we have our crime imprint, which is perhaps what we're most well known for. We do atmospheric and geographic crime fiction set all around the world or within sort of a US subculture or really specific geography. That's what I would say we do best and what we do most of within the crime imprint. And then we have Soho Press, which is our literary imprint. We do genre-defying, expansive literary fiction work. My colleague Mark Doughton curates that list. And then we have Soho Teen, which is our YA imprint. And as teen suggests, that's sort of the age that we publish for there. My colleague Alexa Waco curates that list. She does a lot of fantastic work on that specific venture. And then last and newest is our horror imprint, Hell's 100. We've published two titles, 2 brand new titles with our horror imprint, and we have more to come. So that's in its nascent. We launched it last year. It already feels like we've been working on it forever, but it's not true. So those are our 4 imprints, and the way they interact is simply that for each, I think we study the audiences and we study the specific markets that make a book successful, and we really try to do our work to reach the right people, to reach the right authors for blurbs, and to show them correctly, when we take them around at trade shows and bookseller events and things like that. There was another question, Lily. I think what makes it a crime book is specifically the aesthetic elements of genre, but also the genre expectations. So we will publish mysteries, whodunits, thrillers, which is sort of distinct from a mystery, and we publish noir. And what really separates crime fiction from other genres of fiction, well, that's a discussion we could talk about for hours, but it has that crime aesthetic or a whodunit or sort of a murder aspect. Yeah.
Interesting. It's so interesting to hear about the different, I love that you said genre expectations too, and that really deep understanding of what passionate readers of the genre expect, but also I think Soho Press, they're in Soho Crime too. There's so much interest from outside of the genre as well. I would love to hear you both talk a little bit about relationships between author, editor, agent, publisher, like how it all works together. I know specifically Authors Guild audience members are really interested always in how an author gets their agent. And Ramona, I know you said it took 8 years for Shutter to make its way out into the world. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about the process of finding your agent, the ups and downs of that journey.
Oh, sure. Well, I have a couple of stories for you. So like I did mention that when I graduated, one of my mentors, Eden Robinson, she actually recommended me to her agent. And I submitted like a few chapters and then the book. And then I had an agent. It was pretty quick. And it really was because of Eden. She's the one who recommended me and talked to her agent about me. And so that process, after I've had my first agent, she and I initially sent the book out to about 28, 29 publishing houses, and we got 28, 29 rejection letters almost immediately. No one wanted the book. Everyone said it was too much and it didn't make sense. They didn't like the timeline. What was some of the other complaints? Oh, it needed to be crime fiction, paranormal, horror, or coming of age, but putting all four of them together wasn't working. So I got a lot of pushback from when I sent the book out initially. And then my agent worked with me. She had me put the book in chronological order. We did a lot of work on it. We sent it back out, got even more rejection letters. And I think my first agent was she was trying very hard to get the book at a big publishing house, and they just didn't want them. And she wasn't allowing bids from smaller publishing houses, and we just couldn't come to an agreement together about how to move forward with Shudder. And eventually she just called me and told me that she was going to let me go, and because she couldn't sell my book, and she didn't she didn't know what to do from that point on. So we parted ways. So my agent and my first agent was probably with me for 2 or 3 years. And we weren't able to sell the book. And then I languished for another couple of years. I could think actually just working, and I was actually filming a lot at IAIA, and doing that work, and just kind of leaving my book like in my computer, and I didn't know what to do with it. And I was really sad. But I remembered that before I even had an agent, there was an editor named Juliet who called me and talked to me for an hour and a half about that first draft of the book. And I knew that she was interested in it, but I never heard about her after that. So I was filming at the MFA program as usual, and Brandon Hobson was there talking. And Brandon mentioned that he was with Soho Press, and I guess it kind of just like popped a light bulb off in my head, and I thought, oh God, I forgot. I should try to find if Juliet is even still at Soho or what. I don't even know what to do. I was really depressed about it, And I asked Brandon about it. I said, do you know Juliet from Soho? And he said, yeah, I know Juliet. And I kind of asked him, she had been interested in it a few years ago, and I felt weird, like sheepish about sending it back. Because I fully thought that she had been part of the bidding process in that early steps. So I eventually found out that she had not been a part of that bidding process, because Soho Press was so small that my first agent didn't want her to bid on it. So when I went back to Juliet, Juliet was so excited and was shocked that I now didn't have an agent and that my book still hadn't sold. So within a few weeks, I think I was on a Zoom call with everyone at Soho and talking about publishing the book. And now, when we published Shudder, I did not have an agent. I was agentless, and so I did have, however, my current agent, Nancy. I knew her because I met her at IAIA. She came with Sherman and visited with all of us, talked to us about getting an agent, what's involved in all of that, etc. And we all met with her individually. So she knew the book. She had read the first chapter when I was still in school. So during that process, I asked her for help, because Soho sent me a contract and it just looked like soup to me. I don't know what any of it meant. Percentages, rights, all this crap. I was like, I don't know. So I called Nancy and I said, can you just like look at this and tell me if this is what it's supposed to look like? Because I don't know anything about it, and I don't have an agent, and I don't want to just go in something blind. So she did. She looked at it and she's like, everything's legit. This is standard language, standard practice for a contract. Everything's looking good, and I'm so glad that you're going to publish your book, and blah blah blah. Anyway, so I signed. We published with Shudder, and then I asked Nancy if she would be my agent, because she kind of already was doing the work. And she actually said no, because she said that she didn't do genre novels. She has a very small boutique. She's got 5 or 6 clients that she works with, and that's it. So she doesn't know the mystery world or the crime world. She told me, and she probably wouldn't be a good fit. So she gave me some names of some people to call. And I started to look them up online, and I was just kind of feeling weird because I felt like these people are strangers. I don't know who they are or who to trust or what to do. And luckily for me, that next morning, Nancy called me back and said, "Did you call any of those guys I sent you?" And I said, "No, not yet." And she said, "Never mind." She goes, "I'll just be your agent." So Nancy is still my agent. And she is great. She checks on me all the time, make sure I'm okay. And she's dealing with this 3rd book with me as well, and trying to like coax me off the cliff every now and then. So yeah, so I had a very strange journey to getting an agent. I mean, I'd had one happen pretty quickly, and I thought I was doing well and everything was on the up and up, and then it just didn't go as we had planned. And and I'm nothing against her either. I mean, she did what she could, and we just couldn't get it done. And and as Juliet will tell you, it was meant to be, because if it had gone the other way, it probably would have come out during COVID. It may not have had the impact it had. There was a reason it had to wait. And she always tells me, there was a reason, Ramona, there was a reason. But I have to say that if it wasn't for Juliet, exposure and Shutter would not exist. She is like the one champion on the planet that cared enough to to come back to me, to be concerned enough to check in on me and see. I mean, she saved me, and I tell her that, and she says, "Stop it, Ramona, I didn't save you." She always tells me that, right? But it's true. I was ready to just like give up being a filmmaker, give up being a writer, and just work and go get a teaching job. I mean, seriously, I was ready to give up art, give up writing, give up filmmaking. I was at that point. I really was. And so the fact that Juliet stepped in when she did saved me.
Yeah.
And like I say, there would be no books if it wasn't for Juliet, period. So sorry, Juliet, you saved me, and you can't take it back.
Yeah, now it's on a recording too via the Authors Guild, and that's official. I love this agenting story so much. I fully realized that it was, 8 years of heartbreak, and it was difficult. I can see in the Q&A box as well, the audience also appreciates it, but I really am so grateful to hear you share that again, because I just think it's such a great lesson too, of like sometimes the first agent that feels so special right out of school, like it just doesn't work out. And also I think there's a lesson too, and like it sounds like that agent was maybe pushing the book into a vessel that it didn't really fit into, didn't want to be into, and finding an indie like Soho, which maybe this initial agent was like, oh, they're too small, but then like it's longlisted for the National Book Award. No big deal. You now have a sequel. There's a 3rd book coming. Like, I think it's just such a good reminder to keep the faith. I think it's really important to have that all in mind, and also to like reach out to someone again, even if it's been a couple of years. And I want to talk about Juliet. The elusive Juliet we're mentioning is Juliet Graham. She is an editor at Soho Press. We want to give her a huge shout out. She is also an author. She's currently on book tour, which is why she has not joined us, but I know she is here in spirit. And I want to ask Nick to actually talk a little bit, to sing more praises about Juliet, but also to talk about, your involvement with Exposure. Juliet was the editor on Shutter. And I love what Ramona was saying, like this book is mixing supernatural, thriller, crime fiction, coming of age, and the first agent you worked with didn't think that could kind of work together. And at Soho Press, I love that Juliet was like, of course it does, which it makes so much sense. And so I'd love to hear from you stories about working on these books from an editorial side.
Yeah, of course. Well, first of all, Juliet told me, Ramona, that if you tried to say that she saved you, I had to push back and remind you that you wrote this book, this brilliant book yourself, that this was your idea, this was your work. But I'll stop there. Yeah, Juliet's brilliant. And I think one of the main things editorially that she has taught me, and that I think is exemplified in Ramona's experience and story, is the importance of relationship building, right? Like this is so often a long game. This is not a snap of the finger and your book is appearing in the world. It takes years. It takes years of writing. Everyone on this call knows this. Writing a book can be amazing. It can be the worst thing in the world. Also, like this is a long uphill climb. But I think what Juliet has really instilled in me is the importance of establishing those relationships, about finding people who you do really believe in, even if their book might not be ready, might not be perfect for this specific publishing venture. It still matters to spend that time. And we're not perfect. We have a million things to get to, and this is a very time consuming craft. But really putting in the work and putting in that time, it bears fruit. And I think in the case of Ramona, like that's what happened. It might have taken how many years, Ramona, but it did happen. And before I was really working with Juliet, I had always thought a bit more transactionally about this process. And now I'm starting to think differently about it. And I think that's important. Because even when you enter into a relationship, enter into a contract with the publisher, you are establishing a relationship that is, yes, business, it's contractual, but because this is book creation, it's very personal. It can be emotional. You can really go head to head with an editor, and I think that's a good thing. I think that sort of getting into it with someone creates good art. So but reminding yourself every once and again that this is a relationship, and a relationship is supposed to have this dimension and these ups and downs is really important. I don't know where I'm going. I'm ranting at this point, but
I love this. I actually
yeah,
have a follow-up question
sure.
for you, going slightly off script. But I would love, because I had forgotten that you were at the Feminist Press, another incredible indie press, before you came to Soho. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about, like, why might an author want to choose an indie versus a big press? And I know that's a little bit of a hot button topic. Um, I'm really here for the rants. So
Yeah.
very curious.
Yeah, I mean, I have a pretty romantic answer, which is an indie press is more willing to take risks on non-traditional or a bit more maybe experimental projects. And Taylor Swift just announced her book as a Target exclusive. So she's actually not going through a traditional publisher. And so it led to all, sorry, my mind's going everywhere right now, but a lot of the bigger publishers, they rely on these sort of big celebrity star deals to keep their business afloat. And I feel like this Taylor Swift thing is a sign to them that we need to be kind of putting our energy into authors who are in it with heart and in it to say something interesting and in it for the craft. And I think that's what indies do really well. I also think that indies value author care. And that's not to say bigger publishers don't, they certainly do. But I think when you're on a list that is a bit smaller and a bit more curated, you have a lot of hands-on sort of love and elbow grease applied to you. You have, the name and the face of everyone at the company you're working with. It's not some sort of imaginary space where there's a million people just clacking away at their computers, but you sort of know who's touching your book and who's creating the narrative of your book. And I just think that the indie economy is diverse and publishing interesting things, and is not afraid to get really niche with it. And I love niche.
I love that. And I think that I want to talk a little bit more about that hands-on approach, the value in knowing the name and face of everyone. I really loved what you said, Nick, about getting into it makes good art. And I want to ask Ramona, because you said when you sold Shutter to Soho Crime, you did not have a sequel in mind. There is now a sequel, very excitingly. It sounds like there's a third book in the works. Um, I'd love to hear what that process was like. Like, what kind of discussions, maybe arguments did you, Juliet, Nick, the other staff at Soho Press maybe get into as you were developing this sequel? As I mentioned, Shutter was longlisted for the National Book Award, which is incredible. Um, but I can imagine that may have also applied some pressure on you to, deliver a sophomore novel in the series. And I'm curious to hear like what that approaching the sequel looked like.
Okay, well, when when Julie and I started working on this after contracts were done and it was time to edit, and Julie and I were starting to work on things, Rita was dead at the end of this book. And there were several times I tried to kill her off in different iterations. I didn't see a sequel because I thought Rita was going to die. And as Juliet and I began to do editing on the book, and changes were starting to be made at the end, and chapters were being moved around, and I started to realize that, and Juliet actually was like, yeah, you can't, sorry, but it's just like, you can't kill her. Like, we can't be all invested in this thing and then she just dies. I just like, and I started to see it because I started to fall in love with her as well. And I was like, yeah, she has to live. And if she does live, then people are going to want to know what happened. And so it came on within about, I don't know, maybe 6 months to a year after we were starting to edit Shutter together. Then I knew like I couldn't kill her, and I couldn't just like end the series there. So that's when almost immediately my mind started turning about how it was going to happen and how we would pick up the story, because there are so many different ways. And that's the thing about the sequel. It's like, when do you start? Like, do you start 20 years later? Do you start the next day? Do you start, sometime down the line? It was hard. It was hard to come up with the concept. But I think when I had my very first event with Soho and Juliet and Paul Brown, when everybody was there, and Marcy and I had an East Coast indie publisher event in Rhode Island. And I literally 2 weeks before that event for Shutter, and Shutter hadn't been released because I think it was like April or May, or no, it was May or June of that year before Shutter came out, that we had this pre-release. I read everybody what turned out to be the second chapter of Exposure. Because at that point I knew that the serial killer was going to happen, and I knew that I was already starting to think about him and build him and research him. And I hadn't really thought about Rita a lot, except that she was going to be alive and she's coming back, and I hadn't figured out what that time period was yet. But I remember I was able to read a portion of chapter 2 at that, but we were all sitting around after the event that night, and I read everybody that part. And Juliet was like, yep, here comes that sequel. But I also knew that I did not know if I wanted to do more than 3 of them. I thought 3 was nice, a nice little holy trinity of gore and ghosts. So, will it go beyond that? I don't know. I know how I've ended it. I sent Juliet the outline for book 3 the day that Exposure came out. I promised her October 1st it will be in your computer, and it was. So Juliet knows how it ends. And we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I mean, it was very organic like that. I mean, I had no plans on doing it. I was so it was so much work to do number one that I didn't even know if I could do number two. Like I was just like, geez, could I even pull it off? So there was a lot of questions involved, but I kind of felt that after I read that chapter to everyone there and everybody was kind of creeped out by it, that I was like, yeah, you can do it. You can do it. You can do it. So it was just, I wrote exposure on the planes, in the airports, driving in vehicles,
Mm,
in cabs during the shutter tour. So I, it was rough.
that's
Yeah.
incredible though. I love that. And I think it speaks to what Nick was saying earlier too about relationship building and building a relationship where you feel comfortable enough to sit around a table, read a rough draft, and then
Yeah.
to know that you're going to get excellent feedback. And even if maybe it's negative feedback, it is going to be helpful and collaborative. Um, I have a question for you, Nick, and apologies, I'm going off script again because I'm feeling incredibly inspired by hearing all of this. As an editor, if you're working with a writer who's working on a sequel, I'm really curious if there are like specific tips you might give them, conversations you might have to overcome that difficulty of like, oh, it was so hard to finish the first book. How could I even do the second? This question Ramona raised as well of like, it's a sequel. You could start it, you know, it could be a prequel. It could start 20 years from now. Like, the whole cast of characters could change. There's so many options. And I'm really curious to hear how, like on an editorial side, you might work with an author through some of these questions.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. My first tip is not to kill your protagonist off, Ramona. I mean, I think with Shutter, that was a very clear and interesting challenge and opportunity with exposure because we do end Shutter on this feeling of, is Rita gonna be okay? Like, is she gonna be okay after this? And that feeling has to in some way propel you into wanting to read the second to see if Rita will be okay. And then you read the second, and no spoilers, but you in the opening pages you're like, oh, she's not okay. she's like going through something right now, and it's actually often, and Ramona and I have talked about this, it can be a difficult read, a very emotional read, a very vivid read about pain and coping with something that's happened to you. And it is painful throughout. And I think it's a beautiful sort of pain, but definitely difficult. Um, and so I don't know, I was really inspired by the way that Ramona continued Rita's story, but was unafraid to kind of go deeper into that well or that cavern of emotion. The first one's dark, but you know, it has this sort of coming of age buoyancy to it that I think makes it so appealing. The second one, Ramona wasn't afraid to really go into the darkness of it. And it's cool. With other authors, I've had, you know, I've worked on now just a couple series openers. I haven't been at Soho that long, actually, only 2 years. But with one author, you know, her book is, she's such a brilliant writer. It's not out yet, so I don't think I'll name it, but um, and she's not here to defend herself, so I'll keep it unnamed. She had such a brilliant protagonist and a really cool twisty plot, but by the end of the story, almost all of her characters were like irredeemably sort of bad, or evil, and you never wanted to see or hear from them again. And so I had to have a conversation with her about um, that line between making characters that are compromised and complex, but who have some sort of chance at redemption, that people want to return to. Um, yeah, but I mean, a lot of this is just building in an arc that is irresistible, that people will really, really want to return to, and then and picking up on those things in number two, reminding your readers in number two about what has happened in book one, but not getting too weighed down by that, just keeping the story moving. Um, and then of course I work on books where the character, it's not about the character's trajectory. It's book to book, it's about what setting are we in? What's the crime we're solving in this book? and the character reacts in the moment, but it's less about the character's life trajectory. So there's all types of ways to do a series.
So interesting. Thank you so much. There's been a question in the chat about marketing, and I want to ask you both to speak about that a little bit, especially Ramona, because you have mentioned being on tour for Shutter, and I know you are currently on tour and traveling widely around the country for exposure. That is sort of part of that marketing machine and rollout for when a book is published. There are book events that happen, the pre-publication event you mentioned. So could you talk a little bit about what that has looked like from your side as an author, what kind of support you receive from Soho in terms of like the in-person events, interviews, but also like social media, they made you a graphic to share, just like all of those little details I think are interesting and would be helpful.
Well, they have been so supportive moving into getting exposure out. I think the greatest thing about Soho is they always allow me to pull the book and take a box and go to the flea market and gallop and sell books as my first event, because that's really important to me. I write these books about our community and about, in particular, actually, in this case, about Gallup itself. So the fact that we're at Gallup Flea Market and all these Diné people are coming to my booth to buy the book and meet me and hang out and chat and tease each other and eat bad food and just chill like for a Saturday before the book came out is awesome. And Soho supports me in doing that. This is the second time. We did the same with Shutter. And we had community events first in Gallup for Diné people. And then we had a ton of local events here in Albuquerque and Santa Fe. And that's really important for the local community, especially because this book is really about this community. And so it's good to have those events made available right away. So this time around, well, with Shutter, Soho really kind of sent me on this rock star tour. Like they sent me to New York and they sent me to Powell's. Oh my God, to see your name on the
marquee.
marquee at Powell's. You know, like seriously. I was so freaked out. So they really rolled it out and I had no idea what I was doing. And it was like right at the end of COVID. So some of the events were kind of like bare and not well attended because people were still freaked out about COVID, and I understood that. But it was still such a great experience to go around and do all these big bookstores that I had heard about, and for exposure, Soho took a kind of a different approach. Paul and Lily and I kind of talked about doing more of a tour based around Native community, like towns or cities that carry a larger Native population surrounding it. Places like Minneapolis, Bozeman, Montana, Tulsa. So, you know, Salt Lake City. These are places where there are a lot of Diné people, or a lot of Native people who are in these areas. And, you know, I think that's important. I think they knew that the impact of Shutter on Native readers, and that it was good to kind of shoot me out to those same kind of spaces. And I've been in conversation with some very awesome authors that I have looked up to for years. Marcy Rendon, Joy Harjo. Tomorrow I get to go be with my favorite Deborah Magpie Early, and we're going to talk about, I'm bringing my first edition of Perma Red for her to sign. And I'm totally fangirling. I'm going to be so fangirling her tomorrow. I'm going to be like, oh my God, Deborah, I think I peed a little bit. But she's going to be in conversation with me tomorrow. And I'm just, you know, and so those kind of events for exposure have been really important to me. And I'm glad that, you know, they see the importance in that kind of tour, and they've sent me to some really great events this time around, and I've had a lot of fun. So it's been a blast. I'm a little tired, I'm not gonna lie. If I wasn't teaching, I think this would be a lot more manageable. But it's the teaching that's got me a little tired. But
I love that.
it's all good.
I think it's so beautiful that you've been able to initially bring the books to Gallup and to the community there. That is so incredibly special. I see a question in the Q&A about the most important elements of the launch. And I think like, making sure books are for sale, advertising, all of that is important, but also like thinking through the heart of what you want the launch to do. And this story of like, it's more important to be at the flea market in Gallup for the community than to be at Powell's for the launch of the books, I think is really important to think about. And it all sounds like such rock star. Like you don't need to go to New York City or to Powell's to have these rock star events. If you have an author you admire, to go with Deborah Magpie Erling in Montana, I think you're going to be like, that is also a total rock star pairing. I'm actually incredibly sad that I can't be in Montana tomorrow. That sounds amazing. Oh my gosh. There was a question that an audience member submitted before the event about your experience, and I think this is a good time to talk about it, but your experience as a published writer and also a filmmaker within the Diné and Native community. I'd love to hear, how have the books been received by the community? What is it? What is the energy like at the flea market? It just sounds like so much fun. It sounds amazing.
Well, I am so lucky that I have a mentor of mine here in Albuquerque. Her name's Dr. Jennifer Diné, and she goes with me. Because like the first year in Shutter, I was like, Dr. D, I'm too scared. Like I really was scared because I didn't know how Diné people would react to this book about death, with the taboos and everything. And I was concerned that I would get called out or yelled at or something was going to happen. And so every time I have this concern, Dr. Diné is like, no, I'll go with you. Like they would not dare with me there. And she's right. Like we go to the flea market and she'll be like a carnival barker out there telling everybody, Diné author sitting in her booth with her book. You better buy it. There's lots of gore. There's blood. This time she was telling everybody, she murders a bar owner. Come buy this book.
I love
She's
her. Oh my
she's
gosh.
I love her too. She's so great. But like that kind of energy has just been so cool. So when you get that kind of energy, people come up. A lot of people came to the flea market for Shutter. Like almost all of them were from Tohatchi. And I mean, we didn't advertise it or anything. It was just they were just happened to be at the flea market. So half the people that bought Shutter that first year were all from Tohatchi. Really, they were, or they came from further away to buy it. And so it was just so cool to talk to them and take pictures with them, and we had a great experience. And with Exposure it was the very same. We've had I was so concerned about the reaction that people were going to have to the book and to me telling this story. And I think one of our early events was at the Navajo Nation Library and in Window Rock. And I was so terrified that I was going to get chewed out by a medicine man or that somebody was going to come and, yell at me at the event. That is still very much a scenario I fear and worry about in my head. And I worried about it when I wrote the book. But as I've moved through the different communities and we've talked about Shutter, we're starting to talk about Exposure. I think the consistent theme is that they're kind of glad that somebody just said it. Because we've been all taught for years that this is just something that we don't deal with, that we're not supposed to talk about. We are not, there's so many rules to being a Diné person, and especially surviving or surrounding death and death practices and our belief systems, that people just never questioned it or challenged it in any way. And so the fact that I just said it out loud and put it on a page was something that a lot of people, where I thought they would be adverse and angry about it, have actually been thanking me and saying, well, thank you for just saying what a lot of us have already been thinking. Thank you for helping us to heal. Because I really feel like a lot of Diné death culture and things, the belief systems, and I understand it, and I'm actually studying a lot more about it right now with Dr. Diné, and we're doing a project about death practices and things. And so I am learning as I'm going along, as usual, doing the research. But I think it's also very important to talk about it and as a method of healing, because work into our belief systems, there's this belief that after 4 days you have to stop mourning, You cannot cry after people. You can't mention their name. You can't grieve. Like, our culture doesn't allow us to grieve in any capacity. And I think that this book kind of says it's okay to grieve, and that there's a lot of things surrounding death and talking about grief that is traumatic to us, yes, but I think it's even more traumatic for us not to be able to do things, to grieve in our own time, in our own space, in our own way, instead of being dictated to about these rules and regulations about how we are said to grieve or not. So I think that that has been the biggest thing takeaway for me as to how the community has taken what they have from the book and their perception of it. And so in that way, I'm super pleased, because I was so afraid that it was going to go a different way.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear that and so grateful for your sharing. Yeah, I'm really glad we had a chance to hear from you on that. Especially, I am aware we have about 8 minutes left, so I think what I want to do is some like rapid fire audience questions to each of you. Starting with Nick, I'm seeing there are some questions about funding for book tour and transportation. If these are questions you cannot answer, totally fine. But is that something that Soho Press funds for authors?
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a myth that indies won't support tours. It's case by case and it's situational, and it often depends on what type of events are happening, what type of space it is. Is it a book festival? Is it a local bookstore affair? So I don't know. I think that's my answer, but Ramona might be able to answer from her perspective of her tour.
Yeah, they take care of you. I mean, even if Soho might be an indie press, but they make sure I'm taken care of and that I get to where I need to get. And Lily Philpott makes sure that everything is ready for me. I mean, I really do have a great Paul, and everyone is totally behind on everything, and they know exactly what's going on, and they send me to the right place. And I've had all the support I needed to get to these events and do this tour. Yeah, it's been awesome.
I can actually answer as well because I'm currently working with Catapult Book Group, who are another indie publisher, and I am working on some of their events, and we do the same. Another question for Nick. This is a little bit more of an agent question, so again, no worries if this is not really in your purview. There is a writer who is hoping to move from an indie publisher to a big house for the second book in a series. It sounds like the first book has already been published and has been told by agents that a publishing house wouldn't want to acquire the second book in a series. Any insights, thoughts on that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense to me, just in terms of the series perspective. Publishers want to be able to, God, I hate using this word, but sort of control the property of the whole series. It's better, I think, for everyone. That being said, it does happen. So there's no absolute here. It depends on the book. It depends on what sort of potential they see or what they can do with it. So I don't speak in absolutes ever. This industry surprises me every single day when I wake up. So best of luck. That sounds exciting, and yeah, that's my answer.
Awesome. Thank you. Ramona, you mentioned at the beginning of our chat a documentary you were working on border town violence, and someone wanted to know the name of that documentary, if it's available to be seen. And I may extend that out to ask you to talk about some of the other filmmaking you've done, because you are also an incredibly accomplished filmmaker. And if there's a way for folks to look at some of that work.
Oh yes, well, Crossing the Line is a docu-series that we're working on, about border town violence. And no, it's not finished yet, much to the chagrin of PBS, who is cracking the whip on me pretty hard right now about that. So I'm trying to really we're trying to finish that documentary by early next year. It should be available. Since we've been supported by PBS, it will most likely be distributed on PBS. We'll see if we can't get it on, since it's about such a touchy issue. We're going to try to submit it to like World Channel, Independent Lens, those type of things. And so we're hoping that it gets some kind of extra distribution through the PBS process. As for the other stuff, the documentaries I have done, well, my husband and I have worked on them we've got several different documentaries that are in production right now. We were working on 4, and the docuseries, and then 3 more projects, one about artist's family in Taos called 3 Generations, another one about a sculptor in Santa Fe named Summers Randolph, and then our third called Through Her Lens about Maria Varela, who was an activist, educator, and one of the first Chicana photographers to work for SNCC during the 1960s, where she got a lot of people registered to vote in Selma and around the South, and created a lot of educational materials for voting rights, and educating sharecroppers on their voting rights and things like that. And we're making a documentary about her. And so all of these projects we're hoping to finish in the next year, and write the book. All of, like, Mayors of Shiprock was the last documentary that we finished. It was distributed by PBS and World Channel, and you can see it on Amazon Prime. You can get it on Amazon. And all the other films that are older than that are on our website on Real Indian Pictures. That's my husband and I's production company, and it's REEL, like a film reel, so Real Indian Pictures. So when you can go to realindianpictures.com, and we have most of our older projects on the website there, and also all the documentaries that we did for the last couple of years. We just finished like the 50th year anniversary documentary for the Institute of American Indian Arts in the Museum of Contemporary Indian Arts and Culture. And so we just finished that documentary last year. So all of that stuff also is on there.
Amazing. Thank you so much. It's incredible how much work you are producing, and in the midst of it's like a little bit mind-boggling, and I'm just fascinated.
It's slow. It's a slow process. But every day, all of them inch a little bit closer to completion. So every day.
Fingers crossed. One last question, and then I will wrap it up. Sort of anecdotal evidence from both of you. There was a question on what kind of promotion is most effective when a book is out. And I don't know, Nick, if you can speak. Again, we don't really speak in absolutes in this industry, but what have you seen that is effective? And Ramona, are there any things that you were advised to do when Exposure and Shutter came out? Do you want to kick this off, Nick?
Yeah, absolutely. There are myriad ways to promote the book, and I think about promotion in terms of like what you can do, and then what others write about you. And so I think that benefit of working with the publisher is you will have publicists to essentially push your book out for you into the world. We publish books which we believe can garner review coverage, and so that's one element of it. The other element of it, and especially in the indie press world, is we do a lot of ground game. We are going to conferences all year round. Different people go to different conferences. I sort of mentioned this in the beginning, but book festivals, genre conferences, trade shows for booksellers and librarians. And we show up with a smile on our faces to sort of talk about these books. And it can be exhausting, but it can also be brilliantly fun. And so we do a lot of that groundwork, and it's effort. It's travel, it's effort. But it's probably the best and most dynamic way we get books out into the world, by showing up.
Awesome.
Absolutely. And I mean, they're out there at these huge conferences, and they've got your books, and they're holding it, and they're telling everybody, hey, you got to get this Crime book, blah blah blah. They're walking out there and they're doing the work, and they're working hard to push your book. And Paul and our team in Soho worked really hard on Shutter, And, it was not easy to get NPR to interview me. You know what I mean? It was not easy to do these things. They had to push hard. They had to constantly push the book, push me, get these interviews done, get reviews done. And they're doing the same for exposure. People are sending reviews in, and they are putting them out there, and they're pushing the book really hard. And the one thing I haven't done for exposure that I did do for Shutter was create a book trailer. And I did that. I just happened to be a filmmaker, so I just kind of threw some like a 1 minute kind of spooky thing together. My husband and I went out in the alleys of Albuquerque one night and filmed a bunch of creepy stuff and put together something. And I might do the same for exposure. I just have been really busy, so I haven't had a chance. So next week I might push that out, like a real quick 1 minute something with some of the footage I got in Gallup over the last month or so, and just put it out there. And whatever I can do to help push the book, I need to do as well, because they're working hard. And I need to work hard too. And part of working hard is going on this book tour and doing these events and speaking to readers and spending time with them and answering their questions and doing the work, because they're also investing in me by buying the book and being there and, being interested. And so I owe it to them as well.
Thank you both so much. This whole conversation has been such a beautiful reminder of why I love book people and booksellers, book communities so much. I am very susceptible to being hand sold a book, because I will trust a bookseller if they are out there putting in that effort and doing the work and putting a book in my face and talking about how much they love it. So it is a wonderful reminder, and I am so grateful to both of you and to everybody who joined us. The Q&A box has also been so lovely, and I really hope this was a useful conversation. And also, I think it was a very helpful reminder to keep the faith and keep going. And this is a marathon and not a sprint, as an audience member said. So good to keep in mind. Please pick up a copy of Exposure. It looks like this. You can find it in your indie bookstore. Get a copy of Shutter. I wrote an essay on it when I was at the Institute of American Indian Arts, which is why it has all the little with it. But yes, huge
Thanks,
thank
Lily.
you so much. Thanks as always to the Authors Guild. Thank you, Ramona. Thank you, Nick. And yeah, more writing, more conversations soon. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you so much, Lily and Authors Guild and Ramona.